Hey guys, it's Karenology. This one is pure chaos. You have to hear how it all went down.
It all started with a bang. Not the explosive kind, though it sure felt like one. It was the sound of steel-toed boots clashing against concrete as a team of city inspectors stormed my property, clipboards in hand, eyes scanning for violations that didn't exist. Behind them, like a hawk watching its prey, stood Karen. Blonde bob perfectly sculpted, floral blouse starched and prim, lips pressed into a smirk that reeked of satisfaction. "I told you he was unstable," she said to no one in particular. And just like that, I was being questioned about a trench. But let me backtrack a little. I had just moved back into my old family home in Westmont, a sleepy neighborhood with picket fences and overly fertilized lawns. Fresh out of a draining divorce, I needed peace. I wanted nothing more than to rebuild a quiet life. Me, my tools, my fish tank, and maybe one day weekends with my daughter. The house had history. My father built it with his bare hands. It still smelled of pine and varnish, a scent that anchored me. The porch creaked like it remembered stories I had forgotten. I wasn't here to make waves. I was here to breathe again. In my first week, I joined the neighborhood Facebook group, a cheerful enough place filled with lost pet alerts, garage sales, and passive-aggressive rants about trash bins. That's where I first encountered her, Karen. She had posted a lengthy complaint about someone parking too close to the curb. Something about how it ruined the aesthetic of the community. I couldn't help myself. I commented, "Good thing you're not in charge of the parking laws, or we'd all be forced to rollerblade to work." It was a joke, a sarcastic jab, but she didn't take it that way. 2 days later, she showed up at my door. "I'm the president of the homeowner association," she announced, like she expected me to salute. "And you've already violated 3 regulations." She handed me a warning notice. Official letterhead, bold font, and all. I scanned it. Apparently, my mailbox was too tall, my lawn had unapproved wild growth, and I had used a non-compliant color for my garage door. Never mind that the mailbox had been here since the Clinton administration. And the so-called wild growth was a patch of native pollinators that kept bees alive. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded, closed the door, and sat down at my kitchen table with a mug of lukewarm coffee. Something about her tone. It wasn't just about rules. There was venom in it. That online comment had stuck in her like a splinter. Over the next week, things escalated fast. Every morning, one of her 3 vehicles blocked my driveway. First it was her SUV, then a dented old minivan, then some gray sedan that looked like it hadn't passed emissions since 2003. I complained to the homeowner association. No response. I called the city. They said it was private property. Nothing they could do. I started filming. Everything. Every blocked driveway. Every passive-aggressive note slipped under my door. Every time she walked by with that smug expression, measuring tape in hand, like she was planning to redesign the borders of my lawn. Then I got creative. One evening, sitting with a local beer in hand and a YouTube rabbit hole of land laws open on my laptop, I stumbled upon a thread. Someone had legally installed a koi pond on their front lawn as a landscaping project. But more interestingly, another guy, some retired Navy engineer, had dug a moat around his garden for decorative purposes. The next morning, I visited City Hall. 3 signatures, 1 notarized application, and 2 mildly amused clerks later, I walked out with a permit for minor landscaping excavation. I smiled. Not the bitter smile I had been wearing lately, but the real kind. The kind that starts wars or writes songs. I hired a contractor I found through a friend of a friend. Luis. Short, sunburned, always laughing at his own jokes. He showed up with a crew of 2 and a backhoe that looked older than both of us. When I told him what I wanted, he blinked twice, then grinned. "You want a moat? Let's call it a trench," I said. 3 days later, there was a 4-foot deep, 5-foot wide trench surrounding my driveway. Bright orange cones, warning tape, the whole deal. Louis even added little wooden signs that read, "Watch your step, Karen." That night, Karen showed up with her flashlight, marched up to the edge of the trench and screamed, "This is harassment!" I waved from my porch. "It's landscaping." She called an emergency homeowner association meeting, but they couldn't do anything. Legally, it was my land. I had the permits. The trench was real. So was my smile. But I knew Karen. She wasn't done. And neither was I. Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The very next morning, I spotted her pacing back and forth near the trench, phone in hand, snapping photos like she was building a case for the Supreme Court. She was whispering into her Bluetooth headset, flailing one arm toward my house as if conjuring demons from the lawn. I watched from my living room, sipping black coffee like it was a spy thriller. She wanted a war? She already had one. But she had no idea who she was up against. By noon, a city inspector showed up. Young guy, maybe 30, looking both apologetic and annoyed. He approached with that bureaucratic mix of forced cheer and quiet dread. "Sir, we've received a complaint about an unsafe excavation near a residential property. Do you mind if I take a look?" I gestured broadly. "Be my guest. Just watch your step. Somebody's been trying to hex the grass." He gave me a tight-lipped smile and walked the perimeter of the trench, nodding occasionally and scribbling on his tablet. After a full sweep, he returned, cleared his throat and said, "Everything seems in order. Nice signage too." Most people forget that part. Karen, who had crept up behind him like a shadow in a J.C. Penney catalog, let out a loud, indignant gasp. "You can't be serious. This is a threat to public safety. What if a child falls in?" The inspector raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, it's on private property. It's clearly marked. There's no violation here." She turned beet red. I think her earrings quivered. That evening, I got my first anonymous tip-off. A knock at the door. I opened it to find a manila envelope sitting on my porch. No note. No return address. Inside, photocopies of homeowner association meeting minutes from the past year, most of which had Karen's signature on nearly every decision. Several highlighted lines caught my eye. Budget reallocation, private lawn inspections, and a disturbing number of emergency discretionary fees. It looked shady, very shady. I spent that night with 2 things, a bottle of rye whiskey and a highlighter. By 2 a.m., I had a stack of questions and a growing theory. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry busybody. She was running a quiet little racket under the polite veil of suburban order. Over the next few days, the trench turned into a local curiosity. Kids from a few streets over would ride their bikes just to see it. One boy, maybe 10, called it the Castle Trap. I liked that. I painted it on a wooden sign and stuck it at the end of the driveway. Karen responded by doubling down. I woke up to a notice pinned to my front door. Failure to comply with homeowner association guidelines may result in penalties, including fines and mandatory removal of unauthorized structures. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. That same afternoon, I got a call from a local reporter named Jasmine. "Is this the guy who dug a trench around his driveway?" Her voice was sharp, amused, curious. "Depends," I said. "Am I being arrested or made into a meme?" "Hopefully neither," she chuckled. "Would you be willing to talk about what's happening?" By the time her article went online, the headline read, "Suburban Showdown. Man digs trench to fight homeowner tyranny." It had quotes from me, blurry screenshots from the neighborhood group, and a short interview with one of the older neighbors, Frank, who'd lived on the street for 40 years. "She's been pulling this stuff forever," Frank had told her. "Everyone's just too scared to push back." Until him. The next day, someone left a bouquet of wildflowers on my porch. No note, just a little card that said, "For the bees." My phone started buzzing constantly. Messages from neighbors thanking me, people offering support, a few asking if I'd help them with their own HOA issues. I realized I had become something strange and slightly terrifying to Karen. A symbol. She hated symbols. At the next homeowner association meeting, which I was explicitly uninvited from, things didn't go according to her plan. Turns out, the article stirred up more than online chatter. People showed up. People asked questions. People wanted answers. Betsy, the single mom from across the street, raised her hand and calmly asked for a financial audit. Karen scoffed, but then George, the retired accountant, seconded it, and then Melinda, from the corner house, offered to coordinate it. It spiraled from there. I watched the meeting live stream from my laptop, sipping chamomile tea like it was champagne. Karen tried to maintain control, but her voice shook. Her usual allies were quiet. The tide was turning, and she could feel it. Late that night, I heard rustling near the trench. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. There she was, Karen, standing at the edge of the trench, alone, staring into it like it might talk back. She didn't notice me right away. When she did, she flinched. Then she straightened up and hissed, "You think this is over?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "I think it's just getting started." And it was. It didn't take long for the trench to evolve from a defensive barrier into something bigger, symbolic, viral, almost mythic. Kids started calling it the freedom mode. Teenagers filmed TikToks pretending it was a trap in a medieval video game. Someone even photoshopped a drawbridge with a dragon perched on it. But it wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a line. And lines, in places like Westmont, weren't meant to be crossed. Especially not by someone like me. By the following week, I had installed motion sensor lights around the trench and ordered a prefabricated drawbridge online, heavy-duty, steel-bolted, with a remote-controlled hydraulic lift. The contractor, Luis, grinned like a kid building a treehouse when I showed him the specs. "You're serious," he said. "Dead serious," I replied. While the physical project advanced, something more subtle began shifting. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now waved. Betsy from across the street brought over banana bread and asked if I'd consider running for the Homeowner Association board next cycle. George, the retired accountant, emailed me spreadsheets he'd compiled from old HOA budgets. Each file was more incriminating than the last. Turns out, Karen had quietly rerouted over $18,000 in beautification funds toward companies owned by her cousin, landscaping projects that never happened, maintenance fees for work no one ever saw. It wasn't just annoying anymore. It was criminal. I took the documents to Sienna, a local lawyer recommended by Jasmine, the reporter. Sienna was sharp, young, with an expression that said she didn't have time for nonsense. After reviewing everything, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You have enough to trigger a formal investigation, but be careful. When you go after someone like her, things tend to escalate." She was right. The next morning, I found my mailbox smashed in. Not dented, obliterated. Pieces scattered across the yard like shrapnel. I reported it to the police, but without witnesses or video, they shrugged. "Probably kids," the officer said. "You know how it is, but I did have video." My motion sensors had picked up a figure just after 3 a.m. Tall, feminine silhouette, familiar gait, wearing what looked suspiciously like a floral blouse. I sent it to Sienna. She told me not to retaliate. Let the law handle it. Still, I couldn't sit still. So I worked on the trench, on the bridge, on everything. By Friday, the drawbridge was fully operational. With the press of a button on my phone, it would rise slowly, ominously, and then settle with a satisfying mechanical clunk. Luis even added a sound module that played medieval trumpet fanfare when it lifted. I kept it muted. Usually, the viral attention was snowballing. Jasmine released a follow-up article titled, "The Man with the Drawbridge: How One Resident Took a Stand Against Suburban Power Abuse." Karen was furious. That week's Homeowner Association meeting was chaos. She tried to push through an emergency vote to increase fines for unsanctioned landscaping hazards. But now the board wasn't so pliable. George questioned every line. Betsy demanded a revote. And Melinda, who had never spoken more than 10 words at any meeting, stood up and said, "Maybe we need new leadership." Karen looked like a statue melting in real time. That night, someone egged my windows and keyed my truck. I didn't need motion sensors to know who was behind it, but I kept my calm. I reported everything, documented every inch, forwarded it all to Sienna. Paper trails were my fortress now. Then came the inspection. A city code enforcement team arrived, unannounced, with a warrant for a compliance review. 5 people in reflective vests combed through my property, measuring everything from lawn height to fence distance. It was a blitz. Karen stood on the sidewalk pretending to check her mail, but I could see her grinning. It took them 3 hours. And in the end, the lead inspector handed me a clean report. "You're good," he said. "Actually, this is one of the most organized properties we've seen." Karen turned and stormed back into her house. Her heel snapped on the curb, but she caught herself. Shame. That could have been poetic. I went inside and poured myself a drink. Not a celebration, just something to still my nerves, because I knew this wasn't over. The bridge was up, but the battle wasn't won. That night around midnight my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "She's planning something. Check the HOA accounts." Look for a transfer scheduled Friday. No name, no signature, but I recognized the style. Someone on the inside was cracking, and if Karen's own allies were turning against her, then she was more vulnerable than ever, but also more dangerous. Friday came with gray skies and a wind that felt like warning. I hadn't slept much the night before. My mind kept cycling through the anonymous message. Check the HOA accounts. Look for a transfer scheduled Friday. I couldn't verify the number. Whoever sent it had used a prepaid burner, but the phrasing, the timing, it felt real. I sat at the kitchen table, spreadsheets open, half a dozen tabs on my laptop. Coffee cold. I combed through every document George had given me, yearly budgets, vendor lists, quarterly disbursement reports. Then I found it. Line item 34. Emergency Community Improvement Fund transfer, $6,742. No vendor name, no service listed. Just an account number and an internal code. Dated for that Friday. I sent it to Sienna. Within 10 minutes, she called. "This is money laundering," she said, voice low and steady. "She's routing HOA funds through shell vendors. We need to move now." Jasmine, the reporter, was looped in. By noon, she had contacted the City Integrity Office. By 2, they had requested a formal audit of the Homeowner Association. And by 3, the audit team was on its way. Word spread fast. That evening, neighbors gathered at the cul-de-sac like it was a block party. Except instead of barbecue, they brought laptops, questions, and quiet rage. Betsy circulated copies of Karen's prior notices. George ran a slideshow on his porch wall, detailing every suspicious transaction. Then the unthinkable happened. Karen showed up. She walked in like she owned the street. Shoulders back, lips thin, blouse even more aggressively floral than usual. She stood in the middle of the crowd and shouted, "This is slander. You're all violating HOA confidentiality. This is illegal." No one answered. Then Frank, the Vietnam vet who rarely left his house, stepped forward. He was holding a folder. "I was on the board 15 years ago," he said, "and I kept copies, all of them." He handed the folder to the auditors. Karen lunged for it, but Sienna blocked her. "Don't," she warned. "You're one move away from obstruction." Karen froze, shaking. It unraveled fast after that. The audit team confirmed at least 4 phantom vendors linked to a single P.O. box across town. 2 of them were registered under variations of Karen's maiden name. There were checks, falsified invoices, and worst of all, personal Amazon orders billed as office supplies. The police weren't far behind. They arrived just as the sun dipped below the rooftops. Karen was calmly escorted back to her house. No cuffs. Not yet. But the implication was clear. The next morning, I got a call from Officer Delaney, the same one who had shrugged at my smashed mailbox. "We'd like you to come in and give a formal statement," he said. "This is officially an investigation now. At the station, I laid it all out. Every document, every message, every incident. I even brought the manila envelope." Delaney took notes like he already knew the story, but needed the narration for the record. "She's not going down easy," he said before I left. "People like her never do." Back home, things felt still. For the first time in weeks, no one yelled. No new notices appeared on my door. The bridge sat quietly in its raised position, the trench below peaceful, guarded by motion sensors and silence. Then I got the email. Subject: request for immediate board meeting. From HOA Vice President Sandra Whitmore. It read, We believe the current leadership of the Homeowner Association has failed in their duties. We are calling an emergency vote to appoint interim officers and initiate reform. You are invited to attend. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I pressed the button. The drawbridge lowered with its mechanical hum, and I stepped out into a new kind of war zone. One where words mattered more than trenches. The meeting took place on George's driveway. Folding chairs, clipboards, a Bluetooth speaker playing instrumental jazz. Everyone was there. Betsy, Frank, Melinda, even the teenagers who used to egg my fence. Sandra took the floor. Effective immediately, we are suspending Karen Powers as acting president pending the outcome of the investigation. A vote for interim leadership will commence now. The ballots were simple slips of paper. My name was on several. I didn't ask for it, but when Sandra announced the results and everyone turned to look at me, I knew something had changed. The war wasn't over. It had just taken on a new shape. I was no longer just the man with the moat. I was becoming the man people turned to when the walls cracked. And that kind of power comes with its own dangers. Becoming interim president of the Homeowner Association wasn't something I had on any bucket list. I didn't even want the job. But I also didn't want to sit back and let the neighborhood slide into another cycle of silent compliance. So when the vote was over, and I saw the nervous but hopeful eyes of my neighbors looking to me, I nodded. Not because I was ready, but because I was tired of losing to people like Karen. The first board meeting under my watch was held at the community center. Not Karen's living room. No lavender candles, no intimidation tactics, no laminated rules posted on every wall. We sat in a circle. No podiums, no hierarchy. Just people. Sandra, Betsy, George, Melinda. All of them present. And scared. Not of Karen anymore, but of what we might uncover next. The audit continued in the background, like a quiet engine. More financial discrepancies came to light. Karen had been rerouting funds for over 6 years. Some of the transactions had been buried so deep, only George, with his forensic accounting background, could piece them together. Meanwhile, Karen had gone silent. No word, no retaliation, just absence. That worried me. Then, 3 days into my new role, I found a letter in my mailbox. Not the HOA mailbox, my personal one. A handwritten envelope, no return address. Inside, just 2 lines. You've made a lot of enemies. Be careful who you trust. No signature. I brought it to Sienna. She read it twice, then folded it slowly. This isn't just about HOA politics anymore, she said. This is personal. Jasmine picked up the thread. She started digging into Karen's family connections. Turns out, one of the phantom vendors, MCC Solutions, had been linked to a failed construction firm run by Karen's cousin. Another vendor was tied to a defunct nonprofit that had been under federal scrutiny 5 years ago. I sent this all to the City Integrity Office. They responded within hours. An investigator named Marcus called me directly. His tone was sharp, urgent. We need your full cooperation moving forward, he said. And you may want to think about security cameras. Serious ones. I upgraded the system the next day. Full coverage, night vision, motion alerts. Luis came by and helped install a second spotlight near the trench. Feels like a war zone, he said. It is, I told him. That same evening, While testing the new cameras, I caught something, a figure. Hooded, moving along the side of my house, pausing near the garage. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but the body language was unmistakable. Nervous, determined, looking for something. They didn't break in. They didn't touch anything. They just watched, and then they left. I filed a report, handed the footage to Marcus. He called it intimidation. I called it escalation. The neighborhood started noticing things too. Sandra found her tires slashed. George received a threatening voicemail from an unknown number. Betsy's mailbox was stuffed with ripped-up HOA flyers and dead leaves. Karen may have been silent, but her reach was still active. It all came to a head the night of the open forum. I had organized it to answer questions, keep transparency alive. I thought a dozen people might show up. Instead, the entire neighborhood came. Lawn chairs, notepads, even kids with juice boxes. Jasmine live-streamed it for her local blog. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. We discussed budget proposals, landscaping reforms, noise ordinances. Then a man I didn't recognize stood up in the back. "Why should we trust you?" he asked. "You just moved in. You stirred up all this chaos. Maybe you're the problem." The air went cold. For a second, no one moved. Then Frank stood up. "He's the only one who stood up to the rot," he said, his voice rough but clear. "We've all been scared. He wasn't. That's why we're here." The man didn't reply, just sat back down. But I watched him for the rest of the night. He didn't take notes. He didn't speak again. And when the meeting ended, he didn't leave with anyone. Later, when I checked the security footage, I saw him drive away in a car registered to the same P.O. box used by one of Karen's shell vendors. She was still pulling strings, and whatever she had planned next, I had to be ready. Because this was no longer a war about fences, fees, or flowers. This was a fight for the soul of the community. The night before everything broke open, the wind knocked over my trash can. It's funny what you remember. I was outside in a robe, picking up plastic containers and coffee grounds under a full moon, thinking to myself, this is the calm before the storm. And I was right. At exactly 7:43 a.m. the next morning, Karen was arrested. They came with quiet efficiency. 2 black unmarked sedans, 3 officers in plain clothes, 1 cruiser. She didn't resist. She opened the door in a pink bathrobe, hair wrapped in a towel, holding a cup of coffee like it might shield her. Neighbors watched from porches and windows as she was led away. One kid across the street clapped. His mother pulled him inside. The charges were serious: fraud, embezzlement, falsifying documents, and obstruction of an investigation. Jasmine posted the story before noon. By the time I got to the community center, a crowd had already gathered. No shouting. No celebration, just relief. Like someone had lifted a heavy lid off a boiling pot. Marcus called me in the middle of it all. "We're going public with the full findings today. You might want to brace yourself. There's going to be blowback." He wasn't wrong. Karen's arrest triggered a cascade. Her cousin, listed as the CEO of MCC Solutions, was picked up in Texas. 2 former board members resigned in disgrace. 1 neighbor filed a civil suit for damages after being falsely fined nearly $4,000 over the past 3 years. A whole ecosystem of petty tyranny was collapsing, and no one knew how deep the roots went, but not everyone was happy. A small but loud group started pushing back. They called themselves the Preservation Committee. Their argument? That the neighborhood was becoming too radical, that we were bulldozing traditions, that Karen had only ever tried to maintain order. They passed out flyers with phrases like chaos in the cul-de-sac and the Drawbridge dictator. I didn't react publicly. Not yet. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. We held an open budget review. We created a volunteer landscape team. We introduced opt-in regulations instead of blanket mandates. We even put together a mediation committee for neighbor disputes. And the trench? It stayed. I installed a custom steel drawbridge with reinforced hinges. Luis painted it with weatherproof black enamel. Kids helped me decorate the edges with chalk dragons and fire-breathing turtles. It wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a monument. Then came the subpoena, a knock at the door. A man in a gray suit handed me an envelope. Inside, a civil suit from Karen's attorney. She was suing me for defamation, emotional distress, and intentional community disruption. Sienna read the paperwork with a grim face. "It's weak," she said, "but it's designed to rattle you." This is her counterattack. I didn't rattle. I responded with a motion to dismiss, accompanied by evidence, footage, financial records, witness statements, news coverage. Marcus provided an affidavit confirming the legitimacy of the investigation. Jasmine published a detailed timeline of the events, fact-checked, dated, and sourced. The public opinion was already on our side. The legal system just needed to catch up. Then came the night someone tried to break into my garage. I was home, awake, watching old home videos of my daughter, when I heard the metallic clink of the side gate. The security lights flared. I grabbed the nearest thing, a tire iron, and went out. I didn't see the person clearly, just the shadow darting behind a hedge and disappearing into the street. The footage was grainy, but the body type, the clothing, it matched the man from the open forum. The same car was seen circling the block for 3 nights after. I forwarded everything to Marcus. He didn't say much, just, "We're watching him." Then Jasmine showed me something I hadn't expected. An anonymous source had sent her a document, a lease agreement. Karen had secretly been renting out one of the neighborhood properties under a different name, collecting rent, bypassing HOA disclosures, and hiding assets. That property was now under investigation. And the tenant? The same man from the forum. It all snapped into focus. Karen had enacted the loan. She had built a network. Loyalists, beneficiaries, people with something to gain from her power. And now that she was facing prison, she was activating the last of them. But we were ready. George organized an emergency board vote to freeze all HOA accounts pending forensic audit. Sandra moved to press formal charges through the district attorney. Betsy gathered signatures for a new charter, one that would prevent future abuses of power. I met with Marcus to review personal safety measures. We weren't reacting anymore. We were advancing. The night before the court hearing on Karen's civil suit, I stood at the edge of the trench. Wind blew through the pines. The drawbridge stood still, lit by soft LEDs. I thought of everything it had cost, the fear, the silence, the anger, and then I smiled, because the only thing louder than all of that was the sound of people waking up. The courthouse smelled like old books and nervous sweat. High ceilings, scuffed wood, and a hum in the air like everyone was waiting for something to explode. It wasn't a criminal trial. That would come later. This was the civil suit, Karen's last gambit, a desperate flailing move wrapped in legal jargon and self-pity. But make no mistake, it was war. Sienna was calm. Too calm. She wore a navy suit and carried a folder so thick it looked like it could stop a bullet. Karen, on the other hand, arrived in a beige pantsuit with too much makeup and that same performative limp she'd adopted since her arrest. As if the weight of her lies had somehow bruised her, the courtroom was small, but packed. Neighbors filled every seat, some standing in the back. Jasmine sat near the exit, notebook open, eyes sharp. Even Frank showed up, holding a thermos and nodding solemnly when I walked in. Karen's attorney started with a dramatic statement about emotional damage, community humiliation, and an unprovoked campaign of sabotage, led by me. He gestured like a magician, painting me as a vigilante who had turned a peaceful suburb into a war zone. Sienna stood without a single paper in her hands. "This is not a case of defamation," she said. "It's a case of exposure, and the facts will show why this community needed a wake-up call." She walked the court through every step. The fraudulent vendors, the financial records, the subpoenas, the anonymous tips, the audit, the arrest. Then she projected the photo of the trench, the infamous trench, with the drawbridge up and a banner the kids had painted. "Freedom lives here." It wasn't just theatrics. It was proof. Karen's side tried to pivot, but their foundation crumbled fast. Marcus submitted testimony confirming the legitimacy of the investigation. George provided a spreadsheet tracking every red cent. Betsy read aloud the names of residents Karen had fined into silence. And then, the final nail. Jasmine showed a timeline of events cross-referenced with public records, proving Karen had been hiding income and assets through shell leases. When Karen was called to testify, she broke. On the stand, her hands trembled. Her voice cracked. She blamed everyone, her cousin, the board, even her own husband, who had quietly filed for separation 2 weeks earlier. "I was trying to protect the neighborhood," she said, tears smudging her mascara. "They all wanted to tear it apart." The judge wasn't moved. In her ruling, she dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice. No damages awarded. No appeals allowed. Then she turned to me and said, "Sometimes order is preserved not by silence, but by resistance." It was over, or almost. Karen's criminal trial proceeded swiftly. She pled guilty to multiple counts in exchange for a reduced sentence. 18 months, with parole possible in 12. Her house was seized to pay restitution. Her name was removed from every document connected to the homeowner association. As for us, we rebuilt. The HOA was no longer a fortress of fear, but a hub of cooperation. The new charter passed unanimously. We held quarterly meetings with open forums, rotating leadership, and public budgeting. George became treasurer. Sandra oversaw compliance reform. Betsy ran a community garden project, and me? I served out my term, then stepped down. I never wanted power, I just wanted peace. The trench remained. We added railings and lights, and turned it into a community art installation. Kids painted tiles with phrases like "stand tall" and "truth wins." The drawbridge still worked, and I still raised it sometimes. Not out of spite, but out of pride. One evening, months later, I stood at the edge of it again. My daughter was visiting. She looked around and said, "Dad, this is insane." I smiled. "No, this is justice." She laughed and tossed a pebble into the trench. Somewhere behind us, a neighbor started playing music. People talked, laughed, lived, and for the first time in years, the street felt like home. Not because we won, but because we refused to surrender.